So this next episode is actually a two-part series. We have somebody who comes with a wealth of experience, Delna Avari. She's worked across multiple roles in the Tata Group. She's been the global CMO at Tata Motors. She currently consults and advises some of the largest businesses in the country. And she also has a practice which she calls Business 360, which is looking after companies which do growth and which do scaling. So it's a fascinating 2 episodes, because in the first episode, what you get is you get to get inside the mind of an individual who is working in the highest levels of corporate India and really working on aspects of sales, working on aspects of product development, working on aspects of supply. And you're going to really enjoy that episode if you like the intricacies of business. And the second episode is an interesting one, because that one talks a little bit more about taking a business from 0 to 1. So this first episode is what we're going to go into next. It's what you will enjoy, the large corporate India based episode. So I really hope you like this one. It's a treat. It's, I think, one of the best ones that we've shot so far. Okay, awesome. Delna, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. And it's actually great to be able to sit down with somebody like you and speak with somebody like you, because you are, there's, as we know, there's 2 parts to this. There's one part of the podcast which we're going to talk about for the viewers. We're going to talk about one part of it which is to do with your consulting practice.
That's right.
On the large businesses.
Right.
And then there's Business 360, which is for
latest entrant.
Yeah, which is your latest entrant for businesses who are at the early stage and looking to really grow quickly with scale.
Yeah, that's right.
So this first episode we'll focus a bit more on your consulting practice,
Sure.
and I mean, the first thing that I remember with respect to like a really, like when we hear you sometimes with customers, you're like, I'm the person who sold LCVs in the remotest parts of India.
Yeah.
And I mean, for that time when you were doing that, there weren't too many people like you, right? Not too many women also like you?
There were not too many women. There are enough people who've done it and do that as well. But I'm always been a true believer that, at the start of your career, you do the hard work, you do the grunge work, you go down to the field, right? And I mean, a lot of people they look at the end state, they look at your result, they look at you as a leader.
Yeah.
They forget the journey that actually makes you a good leader, right? And for me, because I always had these plans and I used to plan my life and a roadmap for my career, I was very clear earlier on that I have to have sales experience. And I used to always say that if I do it myself, when I'm at the top, I'll know exactly where to look for the real answers.
Yeah.
And that has actually held me in good stead. So you're right. It's very often, even today, people look at me as I am. And so when I'm with client sides or I'm talking to the territory sales manager, they'll start giving me a kahani. And then I have to then plug in and say that, what, wo kahani mat do, because maine khud truck bechi hai Haryana mein ya UP mein, and it's true that it might not have been a phenomenally long stint, but that 1.5 years where I was actually selling trucks on ground, that's what actually makes you who you are.
Got it.
And that's what actually is the base of my consulting practice in a lot of ways.
So can you talk a bit more about your consulting practice, and the kind of work that you're doing right now? Because, I think within the services ecosystem, there is companies who can do the creative work, and there's companies who can do the digital work, and companies who can do, BTL events. There's very few like you who actually go under the skin and are able to bring, the efficiency within the sales systems.
Right.
Break it open, rehire,
That's right.
Reorganize, link it then back with marketing. So I'd love to understand a bit more about that.
Typically, actually, if you honestly look at it on the consulting practice side, it is like any other business transformation and scaling consulting practice in terms of the way it's structured, right? The difference comes in the kind of solutioning that we do, simply because a lot of it is a reflection of the work that I have done. So because I have done in 18 months taken from 3% market share to 37% market share, or when I went into and did a transformation from a turnaround perspective of 3 markets that have been making losses for 14 years, you do a transformation and you're EBITDA positive in 15 months, you're PAT positive in another 21 months.
Wow.
That's the kind of stuff that one did when one was young, right? And so, and of course, market entry. So you go into a foreign country and you do turnaround of one market, you do an entry into another market, you do 40% localization in that market, you set up manufacturing, you set up distribution. So a lot of that, the experience of all that is what led to the consulting practice. And the difference comes in is because I have done it myself, I know exactly what the levers are, and the solutioning is not always very fancy. So a lot of my clients get surprised because I won't give them any fancy PowerPoints. I will give them straight Excel sheets. I'll tell them the data. I'll give them, and over a period of time, the chaps who are used to working with me love that about me, because it's just saying this is the outcome we want, outcome delivered. You get your result, I get my variable pay, and I'm out. And that's the other thing, right? So in a lot of accelerations, we put our skin in the game. We said, okay, we will take the risk along with you. So in that sense, that's the kind of work we do. So we do market entries, we do turnarounds of international markets, we do Indian market turnarounds, sales transformations, brand transformation, all of that.
Got it. And like typically with your consulting practice, sometimes actually maybe before I go to the customer, what's your typical customer like on the consulting practice?
So as it always happens, it's difficult to name them simply because of the confidentiality.
Sure.
But of course, there'll be Tata companies, there'll be the Mahindra companies, there'll be those who have allowed me to take their names are there. And there are at least 3 listed companies. The typical range will be anything from 3,000 crore to about 10,000, that kind of a range, where they have pockets of problems. Right. So it's not, they don't have a problem. They're doing well. They're listed companies. They're doing really well. They're typically legacy companies as well. So because of my years of experience of being in that side of the business, manufacturing companies or industrial companies, they come in as well. So it's interesting that most of them will have pockets of problems, will have a pocket in the sense that some international market is not doing well, or some domestic market, one market is not doing well, or metros are not doing well.
Got it.
And with that becomes a landing point, because you kind of come in with that one problem, and then of course as you start solving for it, you start unraveling many other things that you can do with a company.
Got it.
And that's how it kind of evolves.
Understood. So like so you're saying 2 things, it's 3,000, 10,000 crore size of company with pockets of problems, and that's very critical, because otherwise, and that's one way to build trust, right? Because then you're solving from pocket 1 and then you're going to pocket 2.
Yeah.
And then typically, how does this, how does the process really unfold? Because you've taken out a pocket, and so you'll have.
So it's a simple thing. It's amazing, because I actually so business 360 side of it, where I do work with scaling, right? One of the things I always train people in is how do you do land and expand, right? So how do you land a customer? And then once you've landed a customer, how do you expand your services? And that's typically what happens any which way, even in these kind of things, right? So if somebody says, okay, come and solve for the Metro of Bombay, okay, we'll solve for the Metro of Bombay. Now, when you've started seeing results, you say, hey, you know what? We have problems in other metros. So you start doing those as well, right? So the growth tends to happen in that way, because you've kind of solved one, and while you're solving, you also figure out many other things. So typically, because of my previous experience and being well known in the industry, so I might not be well known outside, but in the industry, right, and in the listed space, and those people, many of them, because people move around at the senior levels, they know me. So they know my experience of doing sales transformation. So invariably, we start with sales transformation, but then it'll go into new product development, it'll go into supply chain, it'll go into turnaround of your entire processes, right? So the landing point might be brand or might be sales, because I'm quite known for that. But typically, once you start working, and because of having done that myself, you start giving suggestions, and then you kind of, before you know it, you're running a supply chain project, and you're running a new product project, and then you're also doing the sales transformation.
Understood. So actually, there's a lot of food to go into now with more questions here, because we started with the pockets of problems, and then you're saying there's sales transformation. So for the for the benefit of the listeners, what typical sales transformation would be done? Like, what are typical sales problems in a large company that you would go in and fix? Like, there might be 3 or 4 templates of problems, right?
I think the first normal one is that you will have some really high market share overall, and you're feeling really happy. And then invariably the promoter is sitting out there and thinking, but you know what, in this critical market, I'm 4%. Or there's somewhere else where I've been doing really well, and suddenly a new chap has come in and is now beating you down, right? And you're losing. So invariably it starts with that.
Got it.
a straight thing saying, you know what, I need to either defend my market share or gain market share.
Got it.
So those are the typical sales things, and those go into sales acceleration projects. So you'll do your deep dives, you'll go into full analysis, you'll put down what are called as drivers of results and enabling environments. So there'll be enablers to help you do that, and that's a typical sales transformation.
Right. So what are these drivers? What are some of these drivers typically in a market?
Is typically anything that will lead to the sales outcome. So if you're saying my sales ambition is X CR, cross, I will then say that, okay, what are the things that I need to do, the levers that I need to activate to help you get that, which have a direct outcome. So it can be your sales, it'll be a salesperson, sales processes, the kind of talent you have, the kind of incentive structures you have, the way you are managing your channel incentives, your channel structuring itself, right? Enablers, on the other hand, are things that are outside the sales ecosystem which are helping this, right? So it can be your supply chain, it'll be your quality, it'll be your product, it'll be your product range, it'll be some quality improvements, it'll be even a review comes into an enabler. So very often reviews are very poor, right? So the process, or something like a sales and operations planning, a production planning process.
Right.
All of those things. So now today, because I've been doing this for donkey's years. My life started actually with sales acceleration quite by accident, where no one thought that we were going to be able to turn it around 20 years back. Did that. So today I actually have my very clear approach, formats and structure. And anyone who tries to deviate from that gets the worst out from me, because I very clearly know that you've messed this process, we won't get the outcome, right?
Got it.
And so that's the kind of stuff. And those are the bulk of projects that come in.
Got it.
But sometimes people will come directly and tell you that, look, I have a problem with my sales team. I want to be here. My sales team is not designed for where I'm going. So I'm at point X, I want to go to 5X, I want to go to 10X, and my team is not able to think beyond that X incremental. And so exponential thinking, and you might be doing something as a company that's taking you to that next level, is not existing in my team. So it actually becomes an entire sales organization project then.
Understood.
Right? And that is a very different behavior than an acceleration, which is all about sales and numbers. This becomes about people. A lot more complicated to do, but very
Is it also
often
a longer term project?
Those invariably are, because an acceleration is about putting your foot on the pedal, right?
Yeah.
So I don't let people start accelerating till we put the basics in place, and then you just go 6 months.
The basics means those drivers and
drivers,
those
enablers, implementation. There'll be some which will be longer term, so we start the work on that and say that I don't factor it into my acceleration. I say, do this, you will need it. 6 months later, you'll see the impact.
Got it.
And then you just accelerate. So you hit the number. Now, once you've hit the number, the logic is that if you were a point here, with all that effort, you go here. If I stop putting a lot of that disproportionate effort also, you will drop a little. You will never drop back down.
Right.
If you've done the thing correctly, because we put in a lot of structural stuff, right?
Got it.
So that's how it works. So it's people side or it's efficiency.
Now just diving a bit more on these drivers and enablers, because it's so critical to the acceleration side. One thing I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the acceleration will most typically happen when there's a headroom for acceleration.
Always a very valid point. Yeah, absolutely.
So, then to identify these drivers or these enablers, you spoke about the drivers being the factors that will
result to the sale.
Which will result this, this change. So sometimes when a market is doing badly, there will always be that sense of defense of the people who are managing the market.
Yeah, always, without doubt. Yeah.
So, how do you cut through some of that? I know you got a very powerful personality and that's what you're known for, but
Yeah, but that can put people off as well, right? So it doesn't always work. Once they get to know me, it works.
Yeah. No, but otherwise, I mean, personality aside, because there's a lot of it which is happening here.
And they can't see the end state. See, that's the other thing. That's an interesting point you raised, right? Because people don't know where they're going. They also don't believe in it, right? So half the time the management won't believe it. There'll be enough naysayers inside the system who don't believe it. The people on the ground will say, "Arey, one more person and we have to endure this, so let's just endure her," right? Till they actually reach that level of being grilled. But sorry, what was your exact question?
So my point is that, within those drivers and enablers, there will be, for lack of a better word, there'll be a little bit of rust. Around it, and there will be this defense mechanism around it. Correct. Saying that we've been doing this for so many years, this is how it's been. So, and you've got basically, if I'm not mistaken, you're working with the promoter, you got 30 days to prove yourself.
Those are the worst.
You've come in there and you are trying to cut through, and you're trying to get to the bottom of Because at the end of the day, you have to commit a number saying, I'm going to accelerate the market share from 4% to 11% or 15% or 18%. And you're going to put your neck out on the line to be able to say that.
Yeah.
So, how do you cut through a lot of that stuff to be able to come at that number saying that, I'm going to commit this number and these are the real problems. These are not real problems. I know a lot of it is experience.
Right.
But if I had to really, ask you to
I'll tell you honestly, because it's a very humbling experience for me as well, right? So when I left the corporate world, I left at the top and I left on my own terms. So obviously my previous group was one of my biggest supporters and, encouragement and all of that, right? But then I realized that's a small set of people who know me, right? And so it was very humbling because every time you went out, you had to go back to scratch, right? So even when I'm introduced to a new person, they will say, oh, great credibility, but can she really do it, right? And that's where you're right. In those 30 days, you've got to kind of really, really stretch. Also, a very long time ago, I moved away from this concept of hourly billing, right? Because you are hiring me for my expertise. So I get very annoyed when people say, how much time for your hour? And I'm like, that's a dumb question, right? And I've actually had a situation now where there are clients who've realized that if they'd actually paid me by hour, they'd be in trouble because the amount of time I put in on their project is phenomenal when I'm gaining the trust, right? Once the trust is gained, then a lot of people are comfortable kind of trusting that if you say you're going to deliver, you're going to deliver, and you're sticking your neck out, so they'll stick their neck out with you, right? But there is no shortcut to that, and there is nothing that, in my experience, allows me to do it better than somebody else. I still have to go through that same process, same process of, in that short finite time, giving certain results, giving more than I honestly can bill them, things like that.
So what I'm trying to ask is that within those drivers, what are the things you're looking for?
See, okay, that's a totally different question here, right? So for instance, you asked me what happens in expansion. Expansion, what starts happening is if I've shown phenomenal results in a weak market with all these drivers and enablers, the next time the expansion happens, next set of cities, they expect the same behavior. But the true acceleration happens when you don't assume, you start from basics in ground zero again. So each of those drivers are drivers. There's an ambition, there's a process, there's a team, there's an evaluation, there is a lever on key account management depending on the kind of business, whether B2C, B2 channel. So these are things which are there. This is called the framework. But the data within the framework changes. And you rightly asked, there are certain markets that don't accelerate. So the things I'm looking for in them are where is my headroom through efficiency? Where is my headroom through appointment? Where is my headroom through, small minor changes which can actually give the result to the organization? And then where are structural problems? And the minute you hit a structural problem, right, you know that acceleration is not going to happen. Then you've got to have the intellectual honesty, which I do have, to tell a client that it's not going to happen. And that if you want to increase in market share, you're going to have to buy it. Right? And so that is what you're looking for.
What do you mean buy market share?
When you say buy market share means, see, a lot of this is not buying. This is hard on ground
tuning.
Work.
Yeah.
No, it's not even tuning, right? You've got to appoint retailers as an example. You've got to appoint retailers and you've got to do daily visits. A person who used to go once in a way suddenly has to do some 10 visits in a day and has to take order and is grilled on why this counter hasn't given an order. It's per counter productivity and stuff like that. That is actual groundwork, right? Those are drivers that are going to lead to an acceleration.
Right.
What happens sometimes is I'm already at a good point.
Right.
If I want to get to the next level, it's not just about doing it better.
Got it.
You might actually have to spend money. Phenomenal amounts. You might have to do random advertising. You might have to give bigger discounts. You might have to give bigger trade schemes. Right? And that is a problem. Because that is suddenly those markets are going to behave very differently from a market where you're doing this on ground work, which is your team's capability. There you've got to actually as an organization start paying it off, right? And buying also, one is that where discounts or schemes or disproportionately higher money into the market for gaining. But the other side is product development. Very often the increase is going to come from product development. So it's not going to happen easily. You're going to actually spend for it.
Yeah.
So there's a structural change that's required.
Right.
Or you've got to introduce a few SKUs. So some of your SKUs might be missing. So you've got to actually introduce
So there's
SKUs.
a capex involved.
There is a capex involved. So that's why it's called buy. So when I say that, so some places you'll have to buy either through your own investment or through cost control. So again, a cost control project, or that through market schemes and stuff like
Got
that.
it.
The increment won't come by processes and people and on-ground work.
So to simplify, this acceleration is in its sense, in itself, a true acceleration.
Yeah,
where
yeah,
the people
yeah.
who are in the market, they're just like, you gave the
Yeah.
example of appointing more retailers.
Yeah.
Increasing the,
Yeah.
all of those things that you spoke
Yeah,
about.
we do it in a micro market. That's the other thing, right? So I do micro market acceleration. You are in this field. You know virality, right? Everyone, I used to get really annoyed when I was a CMO where people come and say viral video banao. What is a viral video, right? You make a video and it goes viral. It's that same thing. The concept of virality comes about when you have a certain threshold that you've hit in a finite place, right? If you've hit a certain threshold in a finite place, it then takes off.
Got it.
If the stuff is good. Right?
Got it.
Presumption is that stuff has to be good. The same thing applies even in a market. You actually get to a point of threshold, and after that, if your stuff is good, you've done the hard work, it'll take off.
Understood.
Right? So most companies don't do that. Once you become really large, and that's why legacy companies are my customers a lot, right? Companies that have been around for 40 to 60 years, they have got used to doing things a certain way.
Right.
And you've got to make the elephant dance, right? So it's a little tougher there, but this is where you actually need to do it because people have got used to doing it in a certain way. You've got to unlock the value.
Understood.
And sometimes you do it in a small geography, you get it going, so you get it to a point, then you pick the next geography, get it to a point, get
Got
going.
it. Okay, now moving from sales to, this product development or, innovation that you spoke about.
Yeah.
So you said that sometimes it invariably the consulting practice starts off with sales.
Landing, yeah.
And then you're going into other
Various aspects as
so
well.
maybe you can talk to us a little bit about some of those other aspects in the work that you do there.
So I'm very clear there are areas that, so initially I was quite happy taking on projects as they were, but today the demand is way more than I can supply, right? Because the quality has to stay at the level. I'm very committed in giving the outcome that I put my neck. It's my name, right? So my consulting practice goes as Del Navari and Consultants LLP. So it's at Del Navari is the starting point. So I make sure that I'm able to deliver that outcome, right? And so here, more and more, if it is hardcore product, I have a nice panel of experts. I bring them in. If it's on manufacturing, I have people who come in. If it's on supply chain, I have people who come in. Invariably, people who I bring in are people who are like me. Most of them actually have a little more experience than me also in terms of number of years, right? I mean, because I have found that I need to have a senior consultant who drives that project, just the way I drive, right? And so in innovation and product development, I have a person that I bring in. In terms of customer care, I have a person that I bring in. Base customer experience practice, I will do myself, right? But if something becomes very technical, why do I do that? Because the technical side needs and management of the internal technical team. And I think I did enough of that in my previous avatar in the corporate world. I refuse to do that anymore. I think the outcome of a lot of my work is on the road and people enjoy it today. They don't know what I went through to get those products out.
Yeah.
So today I'm very, very happy to let my colleagues run it. But that's how it typically happens. I have a panel of very experienced people who do it.
So I understand that there could be, other experts along with you who do it. So I have two questions related to that.
Interesting.
But before I want to just, maybe just the way you gave an example of depth into acceleration, where you said that, all the things that you said about acceleration, where you said that you will break it into micro markets, that, this idea of virality that comes in, that you will be,
you hit a tipping point and
you
then
hit a tipping point, you will actually be accelerating because you're taking the same sales team, improving process, and then hitting.
It's not always the same sales team. I do hire a lot.
So but you're looking higher, you're changing composition of sales team within that same market, and then you're more retailer appointments and things like that.
Sure.
So within product development, could you touch upon a little bit of like stuff that you do?
Typically, what happens is that when you there are a couple of things that happen. Let's look at it two ways. One, the thing that happens is that market is shifting and you've not moved fast enough. That happens again in legacy companies, right? Where you know that it's changing, but the pace of change is not something you have even acknowledged or accepted or are ready for, right? So that's one kind where it's a new product introduction. So we help people think through what those products are. So there is market research that's done. And when I say market research, depending on B2C, B2B, the kind of research will change, whether channel is involved, not involved, key accounts are involved, not involved, on-ground customers. So we do all of that. So there is a research angle that goes into the entire thing. Then we figure out what is it that is currently moving, where do we expect the market to move, when do we expect the market to move, and you start building out a business plan around the new product introduction. And you have product introduction gates. So in NPI you have a gate process, right? So you've got to pass each gate to actually get to that final commitment.
Right.
Simultaneously, one of the other important things that we also do in this is, very often obsolescence is not looked at. So while you are looking at introduction, you're not doing enough to understand what's happening with my SKUs that are not moving, right? So that is another aspect that we do. So we start looking at what do you need to actually make obsolete, what do you need to actually get to a point of so even something as simple as I think these are concepts that are so basic, but I'm surprised that they don't get followed. Something called continuous replenishment process, right? Your continuous replenishment has to happen of your A and B. And even now, you don't have that structured very often in organizations. I'm amazed that it doesn't happen. And that's why you keep running out of your fast-moving products. You start, and that's people say, oh, demand is very difficult to forecast. Look, keep the pandemic out. Okay, pandemic affected everyone. So we are not looking at this event that was really awful and really shook up everyone. But I'm saying in normal business, pre-pandemic also, I used to notice that people don't take care of these things, right? So you have a replacement cycle, you have an obsolescence cycle, this kind of a thing that you put in place as a process, right? So all of this starts coming into product development. So product development is not only just the introduction that you're doing, but also what are you doing with your existing range?
Understood.
How are you managing your fast? How are you managing your first fill? So things like that start coming in.
So that's a lot of interesting words, and like I think there's a lot of
Sorry, I apologize.
No, it's really thick because for people who don't have that or don't know that, it's like a good. I guess this,
I apologize if it was a little too much.
It's actually it's a lot of like people can just
avoid using
take
jargon,
it and then just run with it, because they listen to this much and you can actually like per minute the number of important concepts that you've introduced.
I apologize for that. I didn't mean to, but you got me terribly excited on that topic because this is this is something that's very close to my heart, right? I myself have done it in my previous avatar in the corporate. I do that right now as well, where I literally look at a product as a so I do have a small investment banking background as well. So that's it. So I tend to look at the product portfolio also like, okay, what is making money, what is not making money, how are we going to make money? And the money not at a very superficial level that people look at, right? You go into the depth and you look at the platform itself, right? So you have to understand end to end as a longer term vision rather than a minute. Right? A lot of people just look at a point in time. And so the joy that I have is in actually doing this, right? I wrote on electric vehicles in 2010. So, and I said till 2020, nothing will happen in India. It came true. So, so it's that, you predict. That's the joy.
And, just so while you shared a lot, and that's amazing that you shared so much on sales acceleration,
product development.
I want to go third onto supply chain because I'm being a little greedy with that, so maybe like, just the way you've kind of given this crash course on product development.
Supply chain is not as complicated as people make it out to be, right? Because it's if you remove and I'll try to not use jargons and just make it very simple. There are certain things that you've got to kind of keep an eye on. What happens is very often when we look at supply chain, we get caught into the way it has been done in legacy. Right. And that's the reason why you have a lot of startups who've come and disrupted the entire space because they are not a victim of that legacy. They are willing to look at things new, right? And so I always say that starting point is the customer, starting point is the customer expectation, and in everything, right? So whether I'm doing branding or marketing or sales or supply chain, everything, start with that customer at the heart of it, right? So from a supply chain perspective also, what matters to that customer? Right? And again, remember who is the customer. So if the customer is your retailer, the behavior changes. If a customer is a large key account, like it can be a big name that you're supplying to, then that is a different behavior. If it's the final customer who's buying from a counter, right, that person's behavior is very different as well, right? So you've got to think from their point of view what matters. Now, invariably, it'll be a few things only. It'll be your first fill rate. It will be the turnaround time. How much do you fill? If out of 100, how much are you giving me, right? That's my first fill. How much time are you giving it to me? If I order today, when do you deliver, right? Again, what is the important thing? Credit. right? The whole credit cycle, right? So if I am, you are, how much credit are you extending me? And how much credit am I extending forward if I'm extending credit forward? If I'm not extending credit forward, then that doesn't matter. Then it's about me handling my cash turns. So those are the bits that start off, right? And then comes your side of it. So here is my customer side of it, and then my reality. And then when you understand the two and then you start marrying the two, that's when you'll find the best solutions. So typically people don't do that. They do what is comfortable to me.
Got it.
Right? I'm comfortable doing this. This is my process. This is how I sell. This is what I will do. Right? You lagao truck, or because I came from the commercial vehicles background originally, we spend a lot of time actually finding very smart solutions for customers to say, how do you do it better? Last mile delivery to the hub. So hub and then spoke. So those aspects is what I would say in supply chain we start solving for. We try to say, okay, each of your customers, first of all, it's not one type of customer. Each of them have different expectations. And virtually all companies will have all three. Right? Because you will have big accounts. Even you will have that, right? Even in a company like yours, which nobody would expect, you actually have these key accounts, and you actually have the smaller accounts, and then you have the long tail, and each of them have different expectations. And for you, the profitability will shift. Right? If you don't manage your logistics costs correctly, and in your case, logistics costs will be the people delivery, right? But everyone has that.
Yeah.
So the principles, the terminology are the same. So we start helping people solution out that.
Amazing.
And yeah, I don't know whether that.
Yeah, no, that's a great crash course in actually 3 aspects. So I think it's a lot of information for people on the podcast.
Sorry,
No, it's great. I mean, there's like I think people really enjoy this one. And before we round up now, I like as I'm speaking with you, and I'm just trying to draw the parallel. We have a world today where there's all of these big influencers and big names, and here's like you're known in the marketplace as somebody who's understated, somebody who's really done the job. I think that a lot of people listening might just want to understand a bit more about what is behind the person. So maybe if I can just to end with take you a little bit back to your start.
Okay.
And tell us a little bit about how this whole thing started for you.
Oh, that's interesting. So I mean, it's annoying when I mention this, but I actually think of my life in decades. So I was 9 when I said, okay, I will join TAS, which is a Tata Group cardo, and I wanted to do that because I said I don't want to work in one company. I have a lot of stretch in my brain, and I want to do that. So through my teens, I was in all of that.
You were working through your teens.
No, in my teens, I was doing crazy things like going and attending AGMs. At 21, I went for an investor meet of Tata Steel. So can you imagine at 21?
How did that happen?
I was with Dresner Kleinworth Benson, so they were equities research. So I said, can I go for this investor meet because I really want to join this group? And they said, okay, go. They thought it'll be a good laugh because any which way I'd been the first woman on their trading floor, and they thought it'll be a good laugh to send me there. It was very awkward because it was a room full of really old people. And from my perspective, I was 21 then. And so it's always been like that, right? So it's a lot of planning in life. So even when I looked at my time at the Tata Group, it was always about doing international postings, doing entries. I would never say no to tough assignments. And I was thrown in some really, really awful assignments in that sense. And that kind of shapes you, right? Because I did transformations, I did scalings, I did launches, I did setup of distribution. I did that across Europe, I did that across ASEAN. So for 8 years, I lived outside. I've done the UP Haryana. I told you I came back and went back again to the ground. So a lot of it is my own work. And you're right, I've never desired the spotlight or the credit. And if I ever got pushed in, it was something that I did very reluctantly. And even now, I spend about 3 minutes on Instagram. It annoys people, except for the lives where now the time has gone up. But my entire life, I wouldn't spend more than that. I'm very disciplined on what I do. But so it's that. And then I went off to Carnegie.
So can you tell us a little bit of this very disciplined in what I do? Because that's where a lot of people fail,
So it's because I always wanted.
Means I know you'll not like flaunt it, but maybe you can just tell us a bit about it.
Because it makes you sound annoying. It's like as some of my friends would say, you please keep quiet, otherwise we won't slap you because you're just so annoying, right? You're just too much. But it's that I try to extract the maximum out of my life. So even now I'm running 2 extreme businesses, right? And so it's about trust me, I've been an athlete. So I used to run. I was at a state national level. I used to train for 4.5 hours when I was through school and this thing. Of course, you wouldn't believe that now, but I was so disciplined then as well. What I'm trying to say is whatever you're doing, be focused, be mindful, right? If you want to do something, do it well. My 3 minutes on Instagram are very, very productive, right? That's very important, right? It's about, and it's not that I'm saying that it's all boring. I will, it's so amazing. The other day someone told me that this whole Korean drama thing has come back. So I watched the impact of Hallyu in Thailand, and I also all these young kids. So I said, okay, what is happening in India? And very efficiently, I spent an entire weekend watching that, right? So it sounds very silly, but it's that. Everything is led by an outcome, right? And the outcome is something that even fun is an outcome, right? So I want to be happy, I want to enjoy, I want to do yoga, I want to pray, or whatever I want to do, right? It's being in that moment, doing it well for a finite time and not getting carried away. And I think a lot of the lack of discipline comes is because I say I'm going to do it for half an hour and then it stretches to an hour, and then before you know it, it's 2 hours. And that's not me. Every minute is accounted for, every slot is taken. That's why I actually enjoy my time with you, Harshal, because you're one of the few people who's as bad as I am on this, I have to say. You're always someone who's on time, you're always someone who's finite, and that shows in your results, because today you at this young age have built what you've built, right? A lot of people want what you have, but they're not willing to make the sacrifices that you have. They're looking at your end goal, end state, right? So yeah, that's what it is. It's about staying on course.
Good classic. You moved the spotlight at the end of this anyway. So so that was good. But thank you so much for this, and this really quick crash course into how large businesses work. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that works.